This is chapter 8. Chapter 8 is titled Calculate Doses of Oral and Parenteral Liquid Medications. And this is the third lecture and the last lecture. So I stopped on practice problems B. Told you guys that you guys can finish the rest of those problems. If you get stuck on any, always feel free to send me an email. But again, my disclaimer is before you start practicing your problems and listening through these lecture videos, I need for you guys to make sure that you have read the chapter, read the lecture notes provided to you, and review the PowerPoint. All right? There is no reason for you to review these lecture videos if you have not already done that, because my lecture videos are based off of my assumption that you have already done your part. All right, so picking up, we are going to do some practice problems. Do a few of these practice problems C. Practice problem C starts at the bottom of page 267, but the instructions say that you are to use the method of calculation with which you are most comfortable to complete these problems. Refer to the formulas found with oral liquid medications as needed, but use only one method until proficiency has been met. If you need any assistance converting within a measurement system or amongst the measurement system, you can refer back to chapters 4 or 5. I would suggest that you refer back to my lecture notes because I've given you the exact pharmaceutical measurements as your book does not. And it says always show your calculations. All right, so turn to page 268. And let's go ahead and get started with number 1. So number 1 says that the prescribed, meaning that the medication that has been ordered, the prescription is for morphine sulfate, 15 milligrams IM, Q4H, PRN pain. All right. What you have in stock, what you guys have in stock says morphine sulfate, 15 milligrams per milliliter. First things first is asking for us they want us to interpret the order. So what I interpret the order to read meaning that you're just going to write out what you see the order to read. So I interpret this order to read morphine sulfate, 15 milligrams intramuscular, every 4 hours as needed for pain. That's what I interpret the order to read. Well, the next thing they want you to do is calculate the dose. All right. In detail, it says volume of medication to be given as a dose. So that means they want you to calculate the dose. So you're either going to use one of the two methods, formula method or the ratio proportion method. Well, I'm going to use my handy dandy formula method. My formula method is what's most comfortable to me, and that's where I take dose ordered over dose available and I multiply it by the quantity. All right, so my dose ordered, the order is asking for 15 milligrams. My dose available, the label states that the strength is 15 milligrams per 1 milliliter. So my dose ordered is 15 milligrams and I'm going to multiply that by the quantity of 1 milliliter, because 1 milliliter, for every 1 milliliter, you get 15 milligrams on that medication. So my milligrams cross out, leaving me with what? 1 milliliter. Something that I want you guys to keep in mind is that if you're using the formula method, just keep in mind that your dose order and your dose available have got to have the same units. So if you're confused as to what's the quantity and what's your dose available, your dose available should be the same units as your dose ordered. So if in this case my dose ordered was 15 milligrams, but when I look at the label I see 15 milligrams per 1 milliliter, well, that means that my dose available is that 15 milligrams, and that quantity is the 1 milliliter that's associated to that 15 milligrams. All right, so I calculated my dose to be what? 1 milliliter here. All right, so as you can see, your next step is that on a syringe, this is C. I just switched over to a new document, but it says choose the correct syringe and show the amount of medication on that syringe. Well, if you calculated the dose, that dose to be 1 milliliter, well, you must use a syringe that's going to take up that volume, but you don't want to use a syringe over that volume. So again, your syringes for injections come in 1 milliliter, a 3 milliliter, a 5 milliliter, and a 10 milliliter. Well, because my dose is 1 milliliter, then I'm going to choose the 1 milliliter syringe. I'm going to draw my line at 1 milliliter and shade above the line. All right. The reason why you don't want to use a syringe that is a bigger syringe is because if you use a 3 milliliter and you accidentally go over 1 milliliter, well, you just overdosed the patient. If you use 1 milliliter, you can't go over that. You can only draw up 1 milliliter. Same thing with the patient if the patient is doing the injection themselves. All right. So let's go back to my first document, my Word document that has our problem on there. So now that we showed our volume, the next thing I want you guys to do, it's not on here, but I want you guys to provide the prescription label. This is for the patient, all right? If asked for the patient, how would the prescription read? How would the instructions read for the patient? Well, because this is an injectable medication, your verb will be inject. All right, so it will say inject 1 milliliter. Your route of administration is intramuscular. I spelled intramuscular wrong, but that's okay. All right, inject 1 milliliter intramuscular every 4 hours as needed for pain. That is what your prescription label will read to the patient. Inject 1 milliliter intramuscular every 4 hours as needed for pain. All right. Let's do another one. Let's look at number 2. Number 2, I'm still on page 268. Number 2, the order is asking for chlorphazine. Excuse my handwriting, you guys. 10 milligrams IM, Q6H, PRN, N, and V. What you have in stock, you have Compazine, which is basically the brand name of the medication, because right below it you do see the prochlorexine right below it, but the strength of that medication, as you can see, is 5 milligram per milliliter. All right. So the first things first is that we want you to interpret the order. So you're going to basically translate the order as you see it. So my order, how I translate it to read is prochlorperazine 10 milligrams intramuscular every 6 hours as needed for nausea and vomiting. That's what N and V stands for, nausea and vomiting. All right, so now I've interpreted the order. So B, they want you to do what? It says volume of medication to be given in a dose. So they want you to calculate the dose. You can do that either using the ratio proportion or the formula method. I'm going to use the ratio proportion method for those that actually really like that. So on the left hand side, just follow me. I'm going to put the strength of the medication, how it comes as far as the stock. So it's 5 milligram per 1 milliliter. The order is asking for 10 milligrams. That 10 milligrams goes at the top because milligrams is on the top. On the left hand side, X goes at the bottom. And I'm just going to solve this problem. So I'm going to crisscross multiply. So that's 5 milligrams times X equals, crisscross multiply, 10 milligrams times 1, which basically gives you 10 milligrams per milliliter. I'm going to divide 5 milligrams on both sides. 5 milligrams cross out on the left-hand side, leaving you with X. Milligrams cross out on the right-hand side, leaving you with milliliters, but 10 divided by 5 is what? 2 milliliters. So the patient needs to receive 2 milliliters as the dose. So with that being said, we are going to go to our 2 milliliter, not a 2 milliliter syringe, that doesn't exist. We are going to show the volume of that medication. All right, as far as the dose, we're going to show the volume of 2 milliliters. But what size syringe are we going to use? Are we going to use a 1 milliliter, a 3 milliliter, a 5 milliliter, or a 10 milliliter? Remember the rule of thumb. You are always to use a syringe size that is going to take up the volume. All right, that will be able to take up the volume as much as possible. All right, so a 1 milliliter syringe, we're not going to use that. Why? Because 1 milliliter syringe only fits 1 milliliter. A patient doesn't want to receive 2 injections, so you're going to use a 3 milliliter syringe. And what you're going to do, this is C. For number 2, you're going to draw a line at the 2 milliliter. On a 3 milliliter syringe, you're going to draw and shade in above the line. All right? Shade in above the line. That's what that should look like. So, if we keep moving forward, I'm sorry. So the next thing I want you guys to do, I know it's not on the problem, but this is what I want you to do anyway. So now I want you to provide me the RX label. What would the RX label read? Well, the RX label will read, because it's an injection, your verb is to inject. The volume is what? 2 milliliters. Your route of administration is what? Intramuscular. Every 6 hours. as needed for nausea and vomiting. All right. All right. Skip over to number 5. Number 5 is on page 270. And on number 5, we're gonna solve this one together. But as you can see on number 5, it gives you 2 options for the medication. It gives you a label for A, and then it gives you a label for B. So you got 2 options. And so your question may be, well, which one will I give to the patient? Well, let's just look at this step by step. So my order is asking for Mepridine 75 milligrams IM every 4 to 6 hours, PRN pain. All right. What you have in stock, you have option A. I'm going to write option A in red. Option A is Mepridine. I'm just going to put the strength. Mepridine 50 milligram per milliliter. Or option B, I'm going to write it in green. Option B is 100 milligrams per milliliter. Well, first things first, they want you to do, of course, is they want you to interpret the order. So, how I interpret this order to read is Mepridine 75 milligrams intramuscular every 4 to 6 hours as needed for pain. All right. Well, the next question is B. Which vial would you use? Meaning, which label will you use? A, which is 50 milligrams per 5 milliliter, or will you use B, 100 milligrams per 5 milliliter? What your goal is that you want to use the medication that the strength that's going to allow the patient to get a good draw, or they have a better ability of drawing the volume. So for instance, if we were to use the 50 milligrams, okay, if we were to use the 50 milligrams, then that volume would be 1.5 milliliters. All right. If we were to use the 100 milligrams, that volume would be 0.75 milliliters. All right. Well, which one will you use? Well, inside each box, it has 25 ampules that contain 1 milliliter. And keep in mind that these are single dose ampules. So when you open up one, you have to use it and throw it away. So that's also another thing you have to think about. So to answer the question, you're going to use B. All right? You're going to use drug B. We're going to use drug label B, because the reason why I say that is because if you use drug label A, I told you that if I use drug label A, the volume comes up to 1.5 milliliters. But remember, each vial is only 1 milliliter, which means that you're going to have to use 2 vials, but you're going to waste some volume. So it's best to use 1 vial of the 100 milligrams. So the next question is, well, why did you choose the vial that is to be used? Well, that's why. Because if I use the for label B, if I use that means I'm only going to use one vowel instead of using two vowels for label A and wasting one of the vowels. All right. Well, the next question is, this is be considered D. Let's consider this D. Is volume of medication to be given with the dose of medication chosen. So I want you to calculate the dose. Well, I've been calculating the dose just sitting here at the top of my head, but in order to do that, you either need to use the formula method or the ratio proportion method. I'm going to use the formula method, where you take dose order over dose available and you multiply it by the quantity. So in order to do that, my dose order again is 75 milligrams. The availability for label B is 100 milligrams, and the quantity that's associated to that 100 milligrams is 1 milliliter. Milligrams cross out, leaving you with 0.75 milliliters. That's the volume that is needed for that dose. Well, then the next question is, well, choose the syringe and show the correct volume. So let's say we'll call this E. All right. So are you going to use a 1 milliliter or a 3 milliliter syringe? The dose is 0.75 milliliters. That means you need to use the 1 milliliter syringe. So what you're going to do is you're going to find that 0.7, which is here, and in between each line, or in between each whole number, these lines have increments of 2s. So the next line is 0.2, which is 0.72. The next line is 0.4, so that's 0.74, and then the next line is 6. All right, which means that you need to draw a line between the 0.74 and 0.76. So I'm going to draw a line the best I can. It looks a little messy, but this is 0.74 milliliters, and then I'm going to just shade it in above. All right. So, of course, the next thing I want you guys to do is I want you to tell me, well, how would the RX label read? Again, the RX label are the instructions for the patient. So it will read inject 0.75 milliliters intramuscular every 4 to 6 hours as needed for pain. All right, you guys. So I want you guys to finish up the practice problems, numbers 6 through 20, ending on page 277. I also want you guys to do the pre-test and the post-test for chapter 8. If you get stuck on any, please feel free to give me send me an email with your questions and I will answer them. That is the end of the lecture for chapter 8. Again, if you have any questions, please send me an email.